The only culprits of the Chernobyl accident were the plant workers, but the convicts strongly disagreed. Before you watch this video, I'm going to ask you to support my channel with a thumbs up. It won't cost you anything, but it means a lot to me and my channel. Thank you. On July 7, 1987, the trial of the heads of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, who had allowed the worst disaster in the history of nuclear power, began. At the time, Soviet justice clearly laid the blame for the accident on the plant's personnel, who had made a number of grave mistakes. After the breakup of the USSR, the version about the reactor's design flaws that led to the accident became popular. After the Chernobyl TV series aroused heightened interest in these tragic events, the debate over who was to blame for the accident resumed with renewed vigor. The trial is underway. Former CHNPP Director Brukhanov left, Deputy Chief Engineer Dyatlov and Chief Engineer Fomin. The trial was held in the city of Chernobyl. It was located 12 kilometers from the Chernobyl plant and was less exposed to radiation than Pripyat. Although the city fell within the 30-kilometer exclusion zone and its inhabitants were evacuated, it was possible to remain there for some time without damage to health. Under Soviet law, the trial had to take place as close to the scene as possible, and Chernobyl proved to be the best option for a short trial. 6 people ended up in the dock: plant director Viktor Brukhanov, his deputy Anatoly Dyatlov, chief engineer Nikolai Fomin, shift supervisor Boris Rogozhkin, reactor shop chief No. 2 Alexander Kovalenko, and Gosadomenergonadzor inspector Yuri Loshkin. All of them were charged under 3 articles: negligence, abuse of authority and violation of safety rules at hazardous enterprises. Loshkin, being an inspector, could hardly have had any influence on the accident and was made the scapegoat in the process. The same goes for Kovalenko, head of the reactor shop, who was not even present at the plant that fateful night. Brukhanov almost did not defend himself in court, counting on leniency for good behavior. Fomin had been experiencing serious psychological problems since the accident. Before the trial began, he attempted suicide. Later, while he was already serving his sentence, his condition deteriorated so much that he was released and transferred to a psychiatric clinic. The only one who was determined to do battle with the judges and experts was the deputy director of the station, Dyatlov. Resistance. Anatoly Dyatlov, former deputy director of the station, was perceived from the very beginning as the main culprit of what had happened. It was he who supervised the tests, during which, on April 26, it was planned to find out whether the turbine generators in coasting mode, i.e. using the inertia of the mechanisms after their emergency shutdown, could generate enough energy to turn on the emergency cooling pumps. The defendant appeared in court after several months of illness. He was exposed to 390 rem, the biological equivalent of X-rays, but he did not become a passive observer. He actively argued with the experts, tried to ask them counter-questions, and only partially agreed to admit guilt. In his opinion, the actions of the personnel in any case could not have led to the explosion of the reactor, if it were not for the design features of which the workers were not aware. Dyatlov insisted that his actions that night were not gross violations of instructions. He also stressed that he did not know about the reactor power drop before the test because he was leaving the control room to go to the bathroom. If he had known about it, he would have ordered the testing to stop. However, witnesses did not confirm Dyatlov's words and did not see him leave the control room. The experts who spoke at the trial partially acknowledged the validity of his words about the shortcomings of the reactor, but found a neat formulation that suited the court: the reactor is not dangerous when used properly. That is, if the personnel had not taken a number of actions, the accident would never have occurred, even taking into account the reactor's deficiencies. This wording satisfied the court. Dyatlov, Fomin, and Brukhanov were sentenced to 10 years in prison. Rogozhkin received 5, Kovalenko 3, and Loshkin 2 years in prison.
Приговор обжалования и опротестований в касационном порядке не подлежит. Следует подписи председательствующего и народных заседателей. По делу, кроме того, принято частное определение. Судебное заседание объявляется закрытым.
Brukhanov was released on parole in 1991. Fomin was transferred to a psychiatric hospital in 1988. Dyatlov was released on health grounds in 1991. You hit the brake, but the gas goes off. After his release, Fomin went to Russia and did not communicate with journalists. Brukhanov gave interviews from time to time, but he did not arouse much interest in journalists. Still, he was not a specialist in nuclear physics, but a stoker. Besides, at the moment of the explosion he was peacefully sleeping at home and could not tell any interesting details. But Dyatlov started a real crusade to protect his name. He not only gave long, detailed interviews, but also wrote a book in which he revealed his version of what had happened. Using a simple example, Dyatlov explained why the staff could not be blamed for the accident. You're driving and you want to slow down. You hit the brake pedal, but instead the gas goes up. Who would be to blame for the accident that occurred, the driver of the car or its designer? He wrote,
негодным к эксплуатации, чисто по вине Института атомной энергии и Никиета. С таким букетом нет соответствия пунктам требований нормативных документов, взрыв его был неизбежен.
According to Dyatlov's version, the personnel simply did not know that their actions could cause such an accident. This was not mentioned in any operating instructions. It was believed that the reactor had reliable protection. It was sufficient to press the AZ5 button, which would emergencyly shut down the reactor. That is exactly what the staff did on that fateful night. After this button is pressed, the control rods enter the core and silence the reactor. But because of the end effect, the rod's displacers were made of graphite, and when dipped into the reactor core, they caused a short-term surge of reactivity, which was harmless in the reactor's normal operating mode. Those rods worked as a gas pedal, not as a brake pedal, which led to the tragedy. After all, the reactor had long been out of normal operation due to the actions of the personnel. Dyatlov justified himself by saying that he simply did not know about this feature, because it was not specified in the operational documents and instructions. And all their other actions that night could not, even theoretically, have caused an explosion of the reactor. According to Dyatlov, it turned out that the emergency protection, which was supposed to protect the reactor, blew it up itself. So who is to blame? Currently, the most popular version of the tragedy is the following. A rare combination of factors led to the explosion, both the actions of personnel and the design features of the RBMK. The personnel acted in an emergency state, and the protection system aggravated the situation because of the design features. Part of the blame for the accident cannot be removed from the personnel. It was his actions that led to the emergency situation. If Dyatlov, after the abrupt loss of power that occurred before the tests began, had ordered the reactor to be shut down and the tests stopped, or had accurately returned the power to the level required by the regulations, nothing would have happened. But the tests were started at much less than the regulated power and with a reduced operating margin of reactivity. After the coasting mode was turned on, control of the processes was lost. A certain part of the blame also lies with the reactor designers, who allowed the existence of the end effect of the rods, due to which the emergency protection served as a detonator for the explosion. The actions of the personnel themselves could not have led to the explosion had it not been for the design features. But also the imperfection of the emergency protection could not have caused the explosion if not for the actions of the personnel. Neither of these would have caused the tragedy separately. After the Chernobyl accident, the RBMK reactors were upgraded. But only the plant workers were responsible for the accident, some of whom had nothing to do with the fatal tests at all. A version of a planned catastrophe. Proponents of the version of malice generally believe that the dangerous tests were organized deliberately in order to provoke a catastrophe. They point out that a top-secret radar station called Duga was located near Pripyat, which was the main target of the operation. Because of the accident, it never became operational. In addition, this accident was a heavy financial and image blow to the Soviet Union. In this case, however, it is unclear who could be the initiator of such a complex operation. How could he know about the features of the secret reactor, and how it was possible to plan all this in general? Moreover, similar experiments had already been repeatedly conducted at Power Unit 3 and had passed without any errors. The test program was approved at all levels, including the RBMK developers. I thank you for watching. Your support is very important to me. Your comments and thumbs up motivate me to release new videos on interesting topics. Subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the new videos.